We're in an historic drought, and that demands unprecedented action. It's for that reason that I'm issuing an executive order mandating substantial water reduction across our state.
We really do have a hot topic tonight, a very hot topic, and something for the next hour. To the top of the hour, we're going to take this conversation, and then we're going to bring this back in a few weeks as well, because we can't settle on this conversation in 50 minutes. So without further ado, I'll just introduce myself, of course, Deborah Tavares with StopTheCrime.net. We also do run a website called primarywater.org, but we're interviewing the king of primary water tonight, and we're going to be talking about that in a minute. But what I want to emphasize in this program this evening is the absolute importance of understanding we do not have a water shortage. If there is only one take-home that you get from listening to this evening's discussion, it is that we do not have a water shortage. Water is renewable. Now, I'm just going to read a paragraph in a study out of Switzerland, and then we're going to break into what everyone needs to do, and we're going to talk to our guests this evening. So this is called The Challenge of Battling Privatization of Water, a case study of the Swedish water companies. And here's the introduction only. They say that in 2003, during the Third World Water Forum in Japan, Director General of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organizations, which is UNESCO, called for the creation of a World Cooperation Facility. The facility comprised of a network of organizations that would help resolve the water conflicts and aid in transboundary water government. You just heard this. Controlling water across all boundaries, a centralized government of controlling water. The proposal came in response to the increasingly complex and multifaceted system of global water management. Hear this again, global water management. A system sorely needed with regulations. As transnational corporations have become involved in water privatization projects worldwide, their actions often create intense criticism from the affected local communities as well as numerous organizations around the globe. Sweden, long considered one of the strictest environmentalist regulators among the European Union member countries, nevertheless possesses no mechanism to regulate the activities of its own multinational corporations working abroad. Swedish-based corporations are involved in water privatization projects outside of Sweden and projects that would never be allowed within Sweden. So this is just the first paragraph of this globalization and privatization of the water supply. There are many corporate aspects to this, but again, we do not have a water shortage. We do have what is called primary water, and I'm going to be introducing my guests now so that everyone can understand why we do not have a water shortage. So I'm very happy to be talking about primary water. I met Pauer many years ago, actually. Paul, P-A-L, Pauer, P-A-U-E-R. And the motto is water above politics. And a little about Paul, and he can certainly add to this as we get into this discussion this evening, but it's noteworthy to know Paul's history of over 50 years of working on primary water sources and bringing that to life to people in areas that have been deprived. And an example of that is that Paul worked with the Global Resource Alliance for many years in Africa alone, and has located and drilled over 130 boreholes to primary water to various depths in Tanzania in Africa, installing hand pumps that enable villagers to have an easy access to clean water that is free of disease-causing microbes, parasites, and surface contaminants. Before Paul put these wells, these boreholes, and which delivered primary water to these villages, women and girls were forced to walk miles every single day in search of water that was far too often unfit to drink, carrying containers of water on their heads. Sometimes women or girls were seized and killed by crocodiles at the riverbanks as they filled containers with water, or they were attacked by rebels or bandits. Now there is safety and clean water for these villagers thanks to the work of the Global Resource Alliance and the life's commitment to finding and locating primary water, Paul Pauer, who is the website primarywaterinstitute.org. Once again, primarywaterinstitute.org. And when we finish up with this program this evening, you're going to all be encouraged to go to Paul Pauer's website and certainly help everyone you know to get to primary water while we still can. And another quote that Paul has said, and this is so important, and then we're bringing Paul on. He says, quote, "It's hard to get the point across to many people that the earth makes water. We can access it and solve our problems. We don't need massive storage facilities or even aqueducts. Clean, infinite sources of water are right under our feet." So, Paul, with that, I really want to thank you for coming on the program. I know this is your life's work, your goal to get water for the people while we still can, because we're both very much aware that politics is playing an enormous role in preventing people from getting water, and it is a war now. So thank you for joining the program, Paul.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm really privileged to be able to talk to your audience. I've seen some of your presentations before, and I agree much of it, and to a point where I feel free to express my opinion, and I believe this radio station of yours promotes the concept of free exchange of ideas that could enhance better understanding and promote freedom of speech. Primary water is a phrase not coined by myself, but my mentors before me that are all passed on. Stephen Riess was one of them, and I'm not even sure where to start with this, but I think everyone knows, everyone that can read or write, that at some point in their education, someone has had them memorize the fact that water, this liquid substance that we drink, grow things with, swim in it, grow food, it's in our atmosphere to a goodly degree, depending on what the moisture content of the air or what the humidity is. Nonetheless, this substance, water, is the least understood of all substances, and yet it is probably, in my opinion, one of the most important substances, because it is nearly 70% of our body content is nearly 70% moisture. This liquid, which is probably the foremost solvent. Without water, there's nothing. You cannot put anything into solution. And that was the first substance that put everything into solution. Yet you ask the people, do you know what is water made of? And most kids, by the time they are even in the middle of their grade school, they say, well, it's H2O. H2O. Yeah, but what is H2O? 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. And when you think about it, it is really the utter irony of it all that hydrogen, the most volatile of all gases, is used for rocket fuel, and oxygen, the other one, without oxygen there is no combustion. nothing will burn without oxygen. Yet these two elements, 2 parts hydrogen atom and 1 oxygen atom, is combined to make this liquid. Now, this is what got my attention some 50, nearly 60 years ago. Well, pretty close to 59 years ago, to be exact.
Now, Paul, just for everyone that's listening, you are known, actually, as the Hungarian water wizard. So if you're hearing an accent in his voice, you are hearing an accent in his voice. He's from Hungary. And Paul, you and I did a YouTube a couple of years ago called Primary Water Explained. So for everyone that is listening, again, promote this YouTube for the simple understanding of where water comes from. We tried to articulate that as basically as possible so that everyone would understand how we have been tricked into believing that water comes from rain and snowmelt, when actually rain and snowmelt is the evaporation of primary water. So, Paul, I'm going to just give everyone a short definition of primary water as we've described it in the YouTube so that people will have an understanding of that, and then I want you to carry on. We know that primary water is created deep within the earth from the synthesis of hydrogen and oxygen, as you just explained, under tremendous pressure from the earth's internal heat. H2O in the form of vapor is forced upward through rock fissures, which are the weakest areas of the Earth's crust, becoming liquid as it cools. Primary water is forced upward, while atmospheric water is subject to the effects of gravity and flows downward. And in that YouTube, lots of people wonder, Paul, if they have to go to great depths to access primary water. That seems to be everyone's first idea, is that they have to drill thousands of feet to get to primary water. What would you say to that for those that are listening?
Well, you know, if you have a chance to go to our website, it is pretty well illustrated and explained, as you are explaining. This water is actually magmatic in origin. It's made from magma. In other words, when our planet broke away from the sun, spun off, it was just a floating piece of magma that was circling the sun. And then as it cooled off, and anything that cools will crack. I think anybody will know that any substance, be it a pile of mud or whatever, it starts to dry and it cracks. And those are the main structures that are the main fault lines of this planet. Those were the fault lines that originally were present that separated Africa, for example, from South America. If you fit the two of them together, you put Africa right to South America, that's a perfect fit. How come they're so far apart? It's because subsequently, through this miracle that the Maker has done, this alchemy, as it were, that was the true alchemy, this substance, this magma, turned into water. Suddenly we had these two gases, distinct gases, that were later cooled to permit the liquid substance, which is water, and thus needed room, because water you cannot compress. So this water, as it was coming up through these major structures or fractures, pushed the continents apart, and they are still doing so. Today there are new fractures that are occurring ever so slowly, but nonetheless, when we talk of geology, we talk of millions of years of evolution or change.
So now, Paul, let me ask you, okay, so we're the water planet, and these fractures are allowing the water that's renewable, that's continuously made, to surface.
It's new water. It's an
It's new, brand new water. So
yes.
What we can expect is an expansion of the oceans, more water.
Absolutely. It has been growing in size, in volume. It has been over. I mean, if you could shrink it back to where it was when it was it was just a piece of magma circling the sun, it was much smaller. Now you add this volume that has made of gas, hydrogen and oxygen. Suddenly, hydrogen and oxygen combined need space, and this process is ongoing in the center of this planet as these substances go through this metamorphosis, this change. So new water is added automatically at depths. You know, in the
now I want to ask you. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. New water's added whether
in the form of volcanoes. You know, when the volcanoes explode, the first thing they spew is water vapor. I mean, you wonder now, how could they possibly spew water vapor? Because, you know, heat and water, in the real sense of the word that we understand, they are not compatible, because as soon as you heat water, it will turn into steam. And
that's absolutely true. Now, I want to talk to you about a few things that are happening here in California and things that we're noticing elsewhere as well. And I'd like your comments on this. Again, everyone that's listening, as you're listening, I would encourage all of you to consider assisting anyone on rural country lands to access primary water. Go to primarywaterinstitute.org and locate water through the Institute as quickly as you can. Why am I saying this? Well, Paul, we experienced, and I watched your representatives down in Ventura, which for those of you, this is in Central California towards the coast. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. Ventura County created a well drilling moratorium. No more drilling of wells. Just recently, on July 1st of 2018, the water agencies that are looking for global centralized control over the water created a groundwater allocation scheme. And this is absolutely diabolical. And I'll just give you a couple of sentences to that, and then we're going to continue, because I want to talk to Paul about subsidence. So the groundwater allocation scheme is to allow the farmers in the Ventura area to sell the groundwater allotments that they're given. Now, the allotments are, it's less water than the farmer needs to grow that year's season of crops. So there's not enough water to grow the crops for that season. So those powers that be incentivized the farmers being complacent and not screaming and taking to the streets. They've given them a monetary value for that allotment, their groundwater allotment. They can exchange that groundwater allotment or give it to another farmer and make more money from that groundwater allotment than they would if they grew their fruits and vegetables for that season. And of course, we know that once they've embedded this scheme solidly, that allotment benefit is going to go away. But what they're talking about in that area specifically, Paul, is saltwater intrusion along the coastlines. And I would really like for you to explain why there is saltwater intrusion as it relates to the groundwater basins that are being overpumped. If you could explain that to the listeners.
Yes. Actually, Ventura County is nothing new to saltwater intrusion. The Santa Clara Valley, which is the Santa Clara River, the famous Santa Clara River that burst, where the dams burst in the 20s, Mulholland's dams, that wiped out basically Fillmore and Santa Paula and a good part of Ventura on its way to the ocean. That is the Santa Clara Basin. And that has traditionally been recharged from the atmosphere. And as farming become more intense, cabbage, there is a lot of cabbages, and in essence, one of the richest farm areas, I think, in the world, and has the best climate too. It's a very even climate, and it's a beautiful place. By the way, the very end of it, before you go into to the Pacific Ocean, part of the delta is Point Mugu, and the rest of it is Oxnard. And nonetheless, this basin has been periodically overpumped because it is a closed basin. It has a predictable and measurable water table that contains sweet or fresh water that could be used to raise agricultural products. Now, you know, in the greed of man, that has been overpumped many, many times, and basically for a long ways it is seawater level. So as soon as you take the fresh water off, salt water, which is heavier, will intrude on the bottom, and it comes in. You know, you take the fresh water out.
So what we're talking about, and I like the way you described it to me one time, Paul. You said that the water basins are like a bathtub, and they sit there, and they're full of water, and when they're overpumped, then, and particularly when they're up against the coastline, the fact that they're full of fresh water, drinkable, potable water, but then when they're pumped down, the salt water is heavier, and that intrudes into those basins, and they're calling it.
The same concept goes for what is settlement? Another word.
Subsidence.
Subsidence, yes, because once you remove the water, which in essence holds everything up. Water is a very interesting thing. It's not a compressible item. Things tend to float on top of water. They always do. Many areas, in fact, held up by water. And if you take that water out, if they are not packed solidly, which they are in many areas are not, then you have major subsidence problems.
So now let me repeat that, and let me explain to the listeners basically what we're talking about with subsidence, because I am finding in documents that I'm reading that subsidence is being blamed for massive infrastructure fractures throughout this country and collapsing of bridges. Subsidence is also being blamed for too many people using too much water. And what I'm understanding from you, Paul, is that we simply need to access primary water, stop the overpumping of the water basins. So explain that a little more now to those that are listening.
These water basins, which happens to be the Central Valley of California, there are from the surface down to bedrock, which is basaltic, very, very dense material, or granites, basement rocks. They are the ones that make up the bottom of the bathtub, as it were. And the top of it is filled with sand and gravel, figuratively speaking. But those are the areas on which we raise our foods. And that happens to be Central Valley by and large. And those are polluted with over-fertilizing. They're polluted with pesticides, and those don't evaporate. Water you can take out of the soil and reuse to some degree. A good portion of it will evaporate. But in the long run, the last 50 years, there will be such a thing as a cumulative effect of this evaporation and overuse. And what remains will be waters that are no longer usable. They're either too heavily laden with salts or poisons. So then we have this technology now that we're attempting to clean it up. Sometimes too much, sometimes not enough, but it's not possible anymore to drive from Ventura up to, say, San Jose and drink out of it.
Right. Now, so for everyone that's listening, if you are not familiar with the geography of what we're talking about, imagine that you are driving up Central California, which is known as the breadbasket for the United States and ships worldwide as well. That's the area that we are talking about. It is the breadbasket of California and again, parts of the world.
Has a predictable water table and a predictable basement. And in places it's higher, in places it's lower, but overall you can pretty much expect the consequences of either overdrafting or over-fertilizing or over-spraying poisons into this water. So what do we have now in here is even the waters that we have, because a good portion of it, once we pump it out and put it on the crops, there's a tremendous process of evaporation. And the residue are these concentrated salts and poisons. Now, it tends to, plus human habitation, just the presence of human beings and animals on the surface will tend to degrade the water down below that percolates down through these loose or permeable materials until it hits the bottom. Now, in the bedrock itself is where you will find these fractures that extend all the way down that make up the new water or the primary water that are in fact made all the time. In some places, to a great deal of it. In some places, depending on the size of the fractures. And it's very little understood.
So now, Paul, let me understand something that you're saying. Okay, so we're talking about the condensing of the atmospheric water becoming so toxic because of all of the atmospheric poisons, toxins, all the fertilizers, and that then is seeping back into the groundwater table to a certain extent. But under that is coming up pure, fresh, unadulterated water that is clean and safe.
These are the waters that we drill for and I locate, because I can seal off all the surface. I enter these dense structures, be it gosh, I'm missing words now, but
well, so what you're drilling, because I've had the opportunity to go with you on a couple of drill sites, which I really appreciate, and that really gave me an enormous amount of information. Thank you, Paul, very much. So when you're drilling, and you're drilling into the fractures, and you are bypassing all of the muck and mire of the toxic waters, how are we getting this new water up without it becoming poisoned?
Right on the surface, right on the top of the mountains, depending on how the fractures go. So that's why, just please think of it and study that poster of ours, because I think we are doing a pretty good job of explaining that. Because some places there's no surface unsorted material. In other words, you get hard rock, granites, etc., based basalts right to the top of the mountains. There, if the fracture extends all the way up, you may have water pouring out of the side. That's why you get springs on mountaintops. And some of those springs are very, very huge, large.
Now, would that explain those beautiful cascading waterfalls at the tops of some of the mountains in Hawaii, for example, coming out of the tops of the mountains?
There's no snow melt there, by the way. You know, many of
those. That's right.
There's no snow. I mean, the whole place tends to be pretty warm. So what
now explain. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. There's volcanics, so that's coming up.
Those waters are volcanics and prove positive. Not only that, but depending on how they surface, their mineral constituents vary greatly. In other words, one may be very, very low in mineral content, depending on the structure itself, how open it is to the very element down below, or how many other horizontal structures of rock blocking its way up to the surface. See, there are places, even in California, where you have major structures down below at certain places where water wants to come up, and there are horizontal shears, horizontal faulting, because the faulting occurs horizontally also, and on angle.
Yeah, now, Paul, I just want to add this, because after the earthquake a few years ago in Napa, California, it was a sizable quake. Many of the fractures opened up, and primary water was flowing down some of the creeks that were parched and dry because of the geoengineered drought. And so the water companies that I went and listened to them talk did not know. They were literally scratching their heads, Paul, unaware and not willing to listen to the fact that that was primary water being released after the earthquake. So what do you say to that? Because we have so many organizations that are really literally trying to keep the lid on the reality of water. Wouldn't you say?
See, this is really a sad situation what we have in this country, because water should be above and beyond politics. It should not recognize any political party, because it's one of the most important necessities of all life. And you start playing politics with that, and you're going to have major problems, because you can have an economy that collapses, and you can poison a lot of people. I mean, all at once, simply out of sheer stupidity. So
well, I don't know, sadly, that it's by people that are stupid. Many of us have come to realize this is a plan.
Yeah, that's right. They're pretty much evil.
So as we're talking about this evening, everybody that is listening, I can't underscore it enough. Go to primarywaterinstitute.org. Find out how to access water where you are while you still can, before this corporate structure that we're in prevents well drilling. You can't drive these well drilling rigs in your community without being noticed, and you need permits in order to drill for wells. And pretty soon I can say that with the moratorium in Ventura County against well drilling, the fact that they've now come up with this groundwater allotment scheme, and also here now in Northern California, I just learned a week ago that an area where I am after the fires here in the Santa Rosa area, that the Water Agency of California has come in and wants to take over a well that a community has used for a millennium, and they want to charge that community over $2 million to access the water they've always accessed before, and they want to start trading it off. And the community honestly is unaware. They don't realize what the scheme is of the groundwater allocation. And so, Paul, when you are locating water, okay, I know that it helps that people send to your organization a elevation of a topo of their property, and also an aerial map as well, and that from that you can, in your firm, can take a look at the geostructures that you can see that are defined by hills and then elevations, etc. And then you do a site assessment. And I know that this is the process in which you help to determine the availability of water in that location. But I want to say for everyone that's listening, it's more than just that. That's why current well drillers are not necessarily hitting water. It's intuition. It's a consciousness. And Paul, would you talk about that? Because I know that dowsing plays a role in this, and I know that oftentimes people think that that's pretty woo-woo, but we know that everything connects, and that everything must be fine-tuned to the environment, and that plays a role in locating water.
To say something to that, most people are, I shouldn't say most, but a good many people are unwilling to acknowledge the fact that we are all connected on some level or another. And that's not voodoo or woo-woo, that's a fact.
That's right.
All, from this planet, we are going to be ashes to ashes, dust to dust. In the meantime, water is the binder that will evaporate. And we're all going to go back. We come forward, and we are going to go ahead and go back. Now, having said that, I often wonder why not a little more goodwill to the promotion of one another and the good well-being of all. That really starts in seeing that every human being has a right to clean water. And I got to admit, I got to tell you one thing right up front. I am from Hungary. I grew up under the communists until 1956, when we tried to get rid of them and couldn't. And I am not a socialist, but I do have some ideas that everyone has a right to that which they were born with, which happens to be that water that nourished them. And the understanding of this water, better understanding of this water, is of an utmost importance. We don't even know. We just look at these cars that are now using hydrogen for fuel. And guess what drips out of the tailpipes? Water. Wow. Now, here it is. Now, here's that H2O concept manifest, really, vividly. We are now doing this ultimate alchemy, on our level, and we are making fuel out of H2O.
That's true. Now, Paul, I wanted you mentioned Hungary, and I wanted everybody to hear the story about the high IQs of a region in Hungary that was drinking primary water. So would you mention that to everybody that's listening? So for those that are hesitant on attempting to go after this water, you realize that you'll become more intelligent. Maybe that would be an emphasis in which to underscore.
That would be almost too simplistic to say, but at the same time, definitely worthy of ponderance. Because in certain regions by the Carpathian Mountains, we have groups of people who are out of very small communities who had extremely high IQs. They make up a good number, disproportionate numbers of the scientific communities, not only in Europe but elsewhere. And you wonder why. And then, of course, now there has to be something to be said about water. And what does it let's say, transport? When you think about it for a second, almost anything that is responsible for life, including the very conception of a human being, has to do with a liquid that has to live in a liquid. So there is a passing on of information via water, via this liquid. This liquid water is probably the most abused and misunderstood of all the substances that I can think of. Of course, we can make a case for air too, but I think much of this is a scheme, that again leads right back to the very, very beginning of this planet's formation from the two gases. And those very gases were two, hydrogen and oxygen. And and I don't know what else I could possibly add to it, but it definitely is worth pondering on how.
Well, here can I just ask something here real quick?
Go ahead, Nick.
I was just kind of trying to figure out who was it who actually discovered the existence of primary water, and who were the people who suppressed the knowledge of it?
Paul, let me give an answer, and then you talk about that as well. Because on Paul's website, primarywaterinstitute.org, you will find a book, and I believe it's called The Water Bible. Is that right, Paul?
Well, the book was actually, there are several books written on the subject. There are so many of them, it's not even funny.
But that talks about how that was suppressed, and it's a very interesting, sad reality. I know that, Paul, you've talked to me in the past about the fact that California did not need to build the aqueduct and reservoir system that it has. In fact, we don't need reservoirs and aqueducts and really dams anywhere. We can move water like Muammar Gaddafi did before they blew up the eighth wonder of the world. So can you explain that to people? Because people need to understand how water, pure, fresh...
Your question on this Water Bible. It is actually written by a man whose name was Michael Saltzman, who lived in the Los Angeles area, as a matter of fact. And the title of the book is New Water for a Thirsty World. And the foreword is by Aldous Huxley, no less. And
it's an excellent read. I would ask everyone to download that, make this a significant part of your library. Teach your children, your grandchildren, everyone you know, and get this information out as rapidly as possible. So thank you for remembering the title. What would be the most important aspect in that book, Paul?
Deborah, I'd like to add just this much, because the book was dedicated to my teacher and master, Stephen Riess. And the title and the dedication reads as follows: For to Stephen Riess for demonstrating his firm belief in democracy, individual initiative, free enterprise, and the need for open minds, the end that all men may be truly free to think and solve the great problems of their times. I think that was a very eloquent dedication.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I just want to go over something right now that I got in, that I received inside a water bill that I received just a few days ago. I'm going to read to you the restrictions of conservation that they're telling people that they must do. And then I'd like you to comment after I read this, because this is alarming, and this is why everyone needs to help one another get to primary water. This is out of the San Gabriel County Water District. It is their summer newsletter of 2018. And it talks about a continued need for conservation of water. And here's some required points. Outdoor irrigation is limited to 2 days per week between 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. Addresses ending on the even number can water on Mondays and Thursdays. Odd numbers of addresses can water on Tuesdays and Fridays. Irrigation runoff is illegal. Irrigation runoff is illegal. No watering during and within 48 hours after a measurable rainfall. Public street mediums cannot be irrigated with potable water. They'll allow those areas to have recycled water, and I'd like to talk about recycled water and desalination when I finish a couple more of these points, and the toxic levels of that type of reusable waters, because our waters are already poisonous and toxic, and now they're wanting us to re-drink it. But let me continue with this bill insert. It says water is served in restaurants only on request. Hotels and motels must provide guests with the option of not having clean towels and linens on a daily basis. No filling or draining or refilling pools or fountains except for makeup water due to evaporation. Decorative fountains, ponds, and lakes must use a recirculating water system. A handheld nozzle with a shutoff valve must be used when washing a vehicle at your home. I'm going to add one more thing in here, Paul, and this is very important for everyone to hear and listen to, because I'm a builder and my family are builders, and we were looking to build a project here in Northern California. We were moving in the process of getting tentative review on some 30-odd townhomes now that, of course, are near the burn area here in Northern California. But in the process of looking to permit this, we found out, and we were told by the planning department, that we had to build in front of each individual townhome what they call a Sioux sump. Now, that was required. What is a Sioux sump? Well, a Sioux sump is what is used to collect all surface runoff from roofs and all impervious surfaces. They go into a man-made wetland that is created with reeds and so forth, has a tank in it in the front yard, and the water is then filtered before it is then pumped out to the drainage system out to the ocean. Now, this is being required on new construction. The water basically is not being allowed to penetrate and go back into the ground. This is another way in which they are creating the illusion of limited water and pumping it out to the ocean, and then having us reuse our toilet to tap, as we call it, highly toxic, and then the desalinization schemes. So what would you say to the listeners, Paul, about reclaiming used water from our sewer systems?
Well, it's wrought with the same kind of problems as anything else when you start to try to readjust for technology's mistakes, and we have plenty of them. We can start with the use of the atom that unfortunately we don't know what to do with the garbage. So we are radiating the hell out of the planet here, and that's number one problem. Top of the line, it has to be. And the number two problem is that they are trying to talk us into all kinds of stupidities, like large-scale desalinization, without explaining what they are going to do with the residue, with all that concentrated sodium in whatever form. If that is not put back into the ocean and redistributed in a very even fashion, which has got to be pretty expensive, it could raise major havoc to fisheries, etc. So we keep on inventing technologies nowadays, only to have to invent other ones to fix the ones that are screwed up. So we have to be very careful before we grab at these solutions that suddenly makes us drink our own sewer water. And I would like to invite the listeners to do attend to this website of ours, in which Stefan Riess was interviewed regarding the subject of what we are doing, and this is already 30 years old. So, nonetheless, it is so futuristic it's scary. Because
now, Paul, we're coming up. We're coming up with just a few minutes left in this segment, and
let me just add this.
Yes, please.
1959, Stefan Riess held up a glass of water and says, this is water, and you guys all know what it is. But I'm going to make a prediction here and now that 30 years from now, 50 years from now, you guys are going to have to buy it in bottles in order to be sure that it is safe to close to even safe to drink. And that's scary. That guy in 1959 predicted the present. Now, if that's, I don't know what else can I say. But boy, that sure got my attention. I thought, boy, that old kook. And he was certainly right. And so for everyone that's listening, I want you to understand that the Primary Water Institute is dedicated to teaching what it is known about volcanic origin of water from deep beneath the crust of our living world.
Okay.
And that this new water arrives at the surface through cracks and fissures in rocks and strata due to tectonic forces far below, adding to the hydraulic cycle at the surface, and in ocean basins as well. So the primary water is also coming up through the ocean floor, and fissures in the ocean floor, and cracks that cause hydrothermal vents that release superheated water rich with mineral content to mix with salt water. And I want to refer everyone to the Fly Geyser that you told me to take a look at a number of years ago, Paul. Fly Geyser, F-L-Y Geyser, an amazing site. And we're just a moments left, Paul. I'm looking forward to having you back on the program. And is there a final word that you would like to say?
Well, can I ask one real quick question before we go into the break? Because I think this might actually have a little bit of bearing on something. What kind of impact has fracking had upon primary water sources coming to the surface?
That is impossible to measure. But in my opinion, if they're using chemicals, see, they don't know what they're doing. They have no idea. They are extracting. I'm all for extracting hydrocarbons. But you're going to have to know what you're doing, not just go willy-nilly and start fracking all over the place.
Now, Paul, it's my understanding when we've talked about that in the past, that once you access primary water and we bring it up, we can get it through all the poisons and toxins that they've perpetrated.
Yes.
Okay, that's important for everyone to hear. Yes.
But it depends on how deep they drill for this fracking business, because my God, even bedrock is interlaced with fractures. You know, you have to know what regions would permit fracking and what regions would even be conducive to the production of methane. And you know, I am all for progress, but for heaven's sakes, take the time out and learn and study and understand what you are doing.
With that, I'm going to, again, recommend that everyone that's listening get this information out far and wide. That's what you can do. Water is going to be necessary for your survival in the process of what many of us are very much aware is happening to this planet and to humanity. We need water. We need food. Water is food. And we can't grow plants out of water. Our fruits and vegetables are not water plants. This is the slow introduction of reorganizing the food supply. It's an absolute massive shift to control the food supply and control the water. We're going to have Paul back on again soon. Paul, I can't thank you enough. Everyone, please go to primary-water-institute.org. Dig for water. Get water. Share this far and wide. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, for coming on. Stay tuned, everybody. We'll be right back.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. It has been a privilege.